Hello everybody, welcome. We have this beautiful view. Today we're going back to George MacDonald's book, Sir Gibbie, and the entrance to the trail is closed, so we're gonna just do it here, but it's still gorgeous. All right, I'm gonna put the camera here for us. And George MacDonald was the spiritual mentor to C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said every book he ever wrote, he quoted indirectly or directly George MacDonald. Like his name's kind of cut off here, but anyway, so it's a book from the 1800s set in Scotland, and Gibbie is mute. He's not able to speak, but he's amazing. And we learn, all of our lives are spiritual transformation internally. And so this story just shows us what that looks like. Anyway, welcome. It's been amazing, and I just didn't want to read it myself, so I decided to share it with you all. That's how a lot of these books come about on this channel. All right, so let's get back into it. And just welcome, just trust that you're here at this one for a reason. That it's, I'm going to put this over here so that my mouth is closer to the mic, because I didn't bring my other external mics today. All right, this chapter is called A Walk. I've got Leia with us if she'll come up here. We'll see. Oh, okay. She's on her leash. All right. His condition was far more pitiful than his situation. Having no faculty for mental occupation except with affairs, finding nothing to do but cleave, like a spent sailor with hands and feet, to the slippery rock of what was once his rectitude, such as it was, trying to hold it still his own, he would sit for hours without movement, a perfect creature, temple, god, and worshipper, all in one, only that the worshipper was hardly content with his god, and that a worm was gnawing on at the foundation of the temple. So we're talking about Ginevra's dad right now. He gave himself over to kind of buying these stocks and speculating and spending all of the inherited money that she had from her mother in the story. And so now George MacDonald's just describing him in this state that he's in now, where he's pretty much lost everything. Okay, so I'll skip down because I think we read this. Now and then his eyes did wonder to her in a dazed sort of animal-like appeal, but the moment she attempted response, he turned into a corpse. So Ginevra's his daughter. Still, when it came, that look was a comfort, for it seemed to witness some bond between them after all. And another comfort was that now, in his misery, she was able, if not to forget those painful thoughts about him which had all these years haunted her, at least to dismiss them when they came, in the hope that, as already such a change had passed upon him, further and better change might follow. She thought maybe, he would be humbled by the situation because he hurt Gibbie earlier in the story, from seeing things with his crooked eyes, There's so much explained in this. And even in just what I just read, I just listened to a video last night and this morning that was about an hour long, but I listened to it at like 2 times speed. But this girl is describing narcissist and this thing called the Jezebel spirit, and its control and manipulation and power and all of these things. And it's there's so much more to it. I won't go into a teaching here. Let's just read the story. But George MacDonald explains all of it in the first 2 minutes of me reading the book. He just explained the whole video that I just watched, if you understood what he was saying here. It might help if you have the context for the story, but still. She was still the same brown bird as of old, a bird of the twilight, or rather a twilight itself, with a whole night of stars behind it, of whose existence she scarcely knew, having but just started on the voyage of discovery which life is. This voyage of discovery, right? I said that at the beginning, not knowing that was going to be right here. She had the sweetest, rarest smile, not frequent and flashing like Gibbie's, but stealing up from below, like the shadowy reflection of a greater light, gently deepening, permeating her countenance, until it reached her eyes, thence issuing in soft flame. All right. Always, however, as soon as her eyes began to glow duskily, down went their lids, and down dropped her head like the frond of a sensitive plant. Her atmosphere was an embodied stillness. She made a quiet wherever she entered. She was not beautiful, but she was lovely, and her presence at once made a place such as one would desire to be in. Wow. The most pleasant of her thoughts were of necessity those with which the two youths were associated. That's Donald and Sir Gibbie from her childhood. How dreary, but for them and theirs, would the retrospect of her light have been? It just says light, life. Sorry, the F got cut off from the old age of this book. Because it looks like L-I-T-E, but it's L-I-F-E, just the top is cut off. So, how dreary, but for them and theirs, would the retrospect of her life have been had she not come upon them and learned from them and learned the New Testament from Janet, Donald's mother that adopted Gibbie, you know? Several times every winter they had met at the minister's, and every summer she had again and again seen Gibbie with Mrs. Sclater, and once or twice had had a walk with them, and every time Gibbie had something of Donald's to give her. Gibbie used to carry all these things in his pocket that he'd found in the city. Twice Gibbie had gone to see her at the school, but the second time she asked him not to come again, as Miss Kimball did not like it. He gave a big stare of wonder and thought of Angus and the laird, but followed the stare with a swift smile, for he saw she was troubled and asked no question, but waited for the understanding of all things that must come. Wow. That's for all of us, right? We just have to sit with uncertainty sometimes and trust that God will give us the answer. I could go up the trail, but I've got the dog and she's not allowed on the lower trail. Anyway, waited for the understanding of all things that must come. But now, when or where was she ever to see them more? Gibbie was no longer at the minister's, and perhaps she would never be invited to meet them there again. She dared not ask Donald to call. Her father would be indignant, and for her father's sake she would not ask Gibbie. It might give him pain, while the thought that he would of a certainty behave so differently to him now that he was well dressed and mannered like a gentleman was almost more unendurable to her than the memory of his past treatment of him. You know, when he looked like a beggar, he treated him horribly. But now that he's a gentleman and dressed in fine clothes, she'd be upset that her father would treat him so differently. But anyway, Mr. and Mrs. Sclater had called upon them the moment they were settled in the cottage. But Mr. Galbraith would see nobody. When the gate bell rang, he always looked out, and if a visitor appeared, withdrew to his bedroom. One brilliant Saturday morning, the second in the session, the ground hard with an early frost, the filmy ice making fairy caverns and grottos in the cart ruts, and the air so condensed with cold that every breath, to those who ate and slept well, had the life of two, Mrs. Sclater rang the said bell. Mr. Galbraith, peeping from the window, saw a lady's bonnet and went. She walked in, followed by Gibbie, and would have Ginevra go with them for a long walk. Pleased enough with the proposal, for the outsides of life had been dull as well as painful of late, she went and asked her father. If she did not tell him that Sir Gibbie was with Mrs. Sclater, perhaps she ought to have told him, but I am not sure, and therefore am not going to blame her. When parents are not fathers and mothers, but something that has no name in the kingdom of heaven, they place the purest and most honest of daughters in the midst of perplexities. Wow, tell me that. Help us be good mothers and fathers if we are that, if we have kids. And to ourselves as well. It's okay, Leah. Why do you ask me? Returned her father. My wishes are nothing to anyone now. To you they never were anything. I will stay at home if you wish it, Papa, with pleasure, she replied as cheerfully as she could after such a reproach. By no means. If you do, I shall go and dine at the Red Hart, he answered, not having money enough in his possessions to pay for a dinner there. In his possession. I fancy he meant to be kind, but, like not a few, alas, took no pains to look as kind as he was. There are many, however, who seem to delight in planting a sting where conscience or heart will not let them deny. It made her miserable for a while, of course, but she had got so used to his way of breaking a gift as he handled it, that she answered only with a sigh. When she was a child, his ungraciousness had power to darken the sunlight, but by repetition it had lost force. Good, right? She's meant to have sunlight in her own heart, irrespective of her father or anyone else. I wear this shirt. It's like blue, like the sky, right? With the sun shining in it. In haste, she put on her little brown ribbon bonnet, took the moth-eaten muff that had been her mother's, and rejoined Mrs. Sclater and Gibbie, beaming with troubled pleasure. Life in her was strong, and their society soon enabled her to forget not her father's sadness, but his treatment of her. Wow. That's what good friendships do, you know? I got to be with a good friend last night for just a quiet evening, cooking food for her family and just hanging out, watching this movie called Surprised by Oxford with C.S. Lewis quotes in it, of course, right? It was great. At the end of the street, they found Donald waiting them, without greatcoat or muffler, the picture of such health as suffices to its own warmth, not a mark of the midnight student about him, and looking very different, in town-made clothes, from the Donald of the mirror. He approached and saluted her with such an air of homely grace as one might imagine that of the Red Cross Knight. So there are knights back there of a Red Cross. I don't know which order that is. When having just put on the armor of a Christian man from a clownish fellow, he straightway appeared the goodliest knight in the company. Away they walked together westward, then turned southward. Mrs. Sclater and Gibbie led, and Ginevra followed with Donald. And they had not walked far before something of the delight of old times on Glashruach began to revive in the bosom of the too sober girl, right? And her heart just got lightened up from the memories of their beautiful conversations about poetry and life and Christ and God and just anything, you know, the river speaking. Anyway. In vain, she reminded herself that her father sat miserable at home, thinking of her probably as the most heartless of girls. The sun and the bright air, like wine in her veins, were too much for her. Donald had soon made her cheerful, and now and then she answered his talk with even a little flash of merriment. They crossed the bridge. Psalm 102 says, serve the Lord with merriment, with cheerfulness. with this joy in your heart. Come before his presence with a song, with a triumphant song, with the song of victory. I was meditating on it this morning. I forgot the word that I looked up. Not iridescent, something like, it's some other word for cheerfulness, real joy. Anyway, they crossed the bridge high hung over the Dower, by which on that black morning Gibbie fled, and here for the first time, with his 3 friends about him, he told on his fingers the dire deed of the night, and heard from Mrs. Sclater that I'll just spell it out because I don't know if what gets flagged on YouTube, but Murderers. He told about this thing that happened in his childhood with this young man that was actually protective of him. These sailors were offended by him. He was a different color than them. And anyway, the people that offed him had been hanged. Ginevra grew white and faint as she read his fingers, because he can tell he can't speak, but he can do sign language, you know. All right, I just did the whole alphabet for you if you want to watch that slowly and memorize the alphabet. I was sort of not facing. This is A, B, C, D, E, F. All right, you can go from there. Ginevra grew white and faint as she read his fingers and gestures, but it was more at the thought of what the child had come through than from the horror of his narrative, because she met him when he was very young, right? They then turned eastward to the sea and came to the top of the rock border of the coast, with its cliffs rent into gullies, eerie places to look down into, ending in caverns into which the waves rushed with bellow and boom. Although so nigh the city, this was always a solitary place. Yet, rounding a rock, they came upon a young man who hurried a book into his pocket, and would have gone by the other side, but perceiving himself recognized, came to meet them and saluted Mrs. Sclater, who presented him to Ginevra as the Reverend Mr. Duff. All right, you'll see who he is. They'll say it. I have not had the pleasure of seeing you since you were quite a little girl, Miss Galbraith, said Fergus. So Ginevra's father was the laird of the land and owned all this land, and Fergus's father just rented the farm, or, you know, they leased the farm. And so his dad was a farmer and had all these cows and all this land. And so on the social class, Ginevra was higher before, and then, you know, in the book, and how they operated back then. And Donald actually took care of Fergus's father's cows. So he was lower. And then Gibbie before was just, you know, a mute. He looked like a runaway kid from the city, but he wasn't. He was a sir. He was actually higher than probably all of them in according to their social norms back then. But was considered the lowest at first. But anyway, said Fergus. Ginevra said coldly she did not remember him. Oh, thank God, she says this. The youth greeted him in careless student fashion. They had met him now and then for a moment about the college, and a little meaningless talk followed. He was to preach the next day, and for several Sundays following, at a certain large church in the city, at the time without a minister, so they needed a minister, and he's this guest speaker, right? And when they came upon him, he was studying his sermon. I do not mean the truths he intended to press upon his audience. Those he had mastered long ago, but his manuscript, studying it in the sense in which actors use the words, learning it, that is, by heart, laboriously, that the words might come from his lips as much like an extemporaneous utterance as possible, consistently with not being mistaken for one which, were it true as the Bible, would have no merit in the ears of those who counted themselves judges of the craft. the kind of thing suited Fergus, whose highest idea of life was seeming to be great or seeming to be profound or whatever, not really teaching an actual truth. You'll see. Naturally capable, he had already made of himself rather a dull fellow, for when a man spends his energy on appearing to have, he is all the time destroying what he has, and therein the very means of becoming what he desires to seem. So when you're doing that, you're destroying what you're trying to seem. You're destroying that when you could actually use that time to become that. All right. C.S. Lewis, this is where he does quote George MacDonald, even on this, right? He is quoting him indirectly. He says, I think it's in Mere Christianity, he's saying, if anyone wants to be original, you don't try to be original. You don't try to be your idea of something unique. Just be yourself and trust God made you unique, right? Do your gifts, do your art, do your crafts, be who you are. If you're a plumber, be that. If whatever, that's not all of who you are. That's just your profession, but still. All right. Anyway. Naturally capable. Okay. I already said that. Becoming, okay. If he gains, okay. So, for when a man spends his energy, or a woman, right, appearing to have, he is all the time destroying what he has, and therein the very means of becoming what he desires to seem, right? If he gains his end, his success is his punishment. Fergus never forgot that he was a clergyman, always carrying himself according to his idea of the calling. Therefore, when the interchange of commonplaces flagged, he began to look about him for some remark sufficiently tinged with his profession to be suitable for him to make, and for the ladies to hear as his. The wind was a thoroughly wintry one from the northeast, and had been blowing all night, so that the waves were shouldering the rocks with huge assault. Listen to how George MacDonald just described that, right? Now Fergus's sermon, which he meant to use as a spade for the casting of the first turf. Okay, listen to this. Hold on, my phone is balancing my cameras. First turf of the first parallel in the siege of the pulpit of the North Parish. So he's trying to dig his ground to be their pastor of this giant church, right? Was upon the vanity of human ambition. His text began the grand verse. And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy. There was no small amount of fine writing in the manuscript he had thrust into his pocket. His sermon was in his hand when he remarked, with the wafture of a neatly gloved hand seawards. Oh, okay, so he has a neatly gloved hand, and he's casting it, showing it to the sea, right? I was watching these waves when you found me. They seemed to me just such a picture of the vanity of human endeavor, but just as little as those waves would mind me if I told them they were wasting their labors on these rocks. Will men mind me when I tell them tomorrow of the emptiness of their ambitions? All right, so I hope you can understand what he's saying. Like, he's telling these people, like, he's telling them not to chase after these ambitions, and that while he's chasing his ambitions, this is often what we do, like, God help us. A present instance of the vanity of human endeavor, said Donald. What for, did you say, in that case, going on preaching was setting them an ill example? Why are you, what? So he says it in the Scottish brogue. So, like, if you understand any of this stuff, you can write it in the comments for us. It's like the third paragraph down or so, and maybe more. I'll do my best, because Donald speaks back in their native, like, Scottish tone of, like slang words, sort of. Just how they spoke back then. It's not slang, it's just how they spoke. Why'd you go in that case, going on preaching and setting them an ill example? Duff gave him a high-lidded glance, vouchsafing no reply. Like, who are you to talk to me, now that even he's a college student too as well. And just as those waves, he continued, waste themselves in effort, as often foiled as renewed, to tear down these rocks, so do the men of this world go on, spending their strength for naught. Hoots, Fergus, said Donald again in broadest speech, right? As if with its bray he would rebuke, not the madness, but the silliness of the prophet. You do not mean to tell me yon jaws, the billows, right, the billows, doesn't know their business better, nor imagine they have to claw down the rocks, right? That's not what they're trying to do. They're just coming in from the sea or something. Duff cast a second glance of scorn at what he took for the prosaic stupidity or poverty-stricken logomachy of Donald, which Ginevra opened on him big brown eyes, as much as to say, Donald, who was it set me down for saying a man could be a burn? A burn is a river. So Donald had taught Ginevra a long time ago about the river. I was thinking of that earlier, and how you listen to the river and your life is like this river that's flowing, all right? But Gibbie's face was expectant. He knew Donald. Mrs. Sclater also looked interested. She did not much like Duff, right? And by this time, she suspected Donald of genius. Like, he's a poet, but not everyone recognizes it. Donald turned to Ginevra with a smile and said in the best English he could command, "Bear with me a moment, Miss Galbraith. If Mr. Duff will oblige me by answering my question, I trust I shall satisfy you. I am no turncoat," right? We're still like a river. Our lives are like this flowing river, right? Oh, I like being in the light, even though, because when I put my camera over there, it's in the dark. Look at the sky. It's so beautiful outside. We're so fortunate. Thank you, God, to remind me that this day. I often read usually on this day. Anyway. Fergus stared. What did his father's herd boy mean by talking such English to the ladies and such vulgar Scotch to him? Although now a magistrand, that is, one about to take his degree of Masters of Arts, Donald was still to Fergus the cleaner out of his father's byres, of his father's stables. That's how he kept seeing him, because when you're in your egotism, you always want to see people lower than you. Wow, I see the top of the trail where we go. It's calling me. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe today. Anyway. So he saw him as the cleaner out of his father's stables, an upstart whose former position was his real one, towards him at least, who knew him. And did the fellow challenge him to a discussion, or did he presume on the familiarity of their boyhood and wish to sport his acquaintance with the popular preacher? On either supposition, he was impertinent. The sun's coming out. I spoke poetically, he said, with cold dignity. You'll excuse me, Fergus, replied Donald, for the sake of Auld Lang Syne. You know that song? Should old acquaintance be forgot? That's where that word is. But anyway, when I was, as I ever will be, so obligant to you, because Fergus used to let Donald borrow all these books, and he learned so much from them, from the poetry and everything. But that you say now, what you're saying is so wrong. You weren't speaking poetically, though I knew well you think it's poetic, right? Or you wouldn't say it. And that's what's garred me to take you up. What's called me to speak up on this. For the very essence of poetry is truth. And such a word's not true. If such a word's not true, it's not poetry. It's no poetry. Though it may have on the cast clause of it, though though it may rhyme or something like that. Hello. Hi, y'all. Nice to see you. You too. Okay, I try not to get people in the videos, but I went to a sort of remote place. Okay, so when did we start this chapter? Because I think I forgot to say the name of the chapter was The Minister's Defeat. So guess where there's coming, right? Hold on, the wind blew the... the wind blew all of the... I don't even know if that's the chapter. Hold on. Okay, hold on. Sorry. Okay, it's not The Minister's Defeat. That was a different one. That's funny, because I was like, wait a second. I would have said it. Okay, here we are. That was such a great part. Hold on. All right, let's have you just look at the nature. I'll find it. We can look at Leia. She's great to look at. Where did I say this? The name of the... Oh, here. Maybe it is The Minister's Defeat. Come here, Leia. Ugh. I don't have a pause on my camera, or I would, but you can just sit in nature. God, we pray that you be with every single person here. Okay, I found it. Thank you. I found the part of the sermon that we were on. Okay. I spoke poetically, you said. Thanks for your patience. Hope the sun comes back out. It's still called A Walk, so we're on the chapter called A Walk. So it's not poetry if it's not truth, though it may have a cast clause on the end of it, right? A rhyme that rhymes with the line before. It's none but them as knows what poetry is that bothers about poetic license, and that kind of hen scratch is again a poet. He's saying something about that's nobody. Whether it's good or whether it's a coat. Hen said before, no, I'm so sorry, I don't understand this. I wish I did. There is a book where this guy has translated this into normal words because, his father or mother spoke it and he knows it. So anyway, it's right here. So if you know it, feel free. I can't copy his work because that's modern and this is from the 1800s. So sometimes I listen to it on the Audible, and if you hear this in a Scottish accent, then you can understand what he's saying more. But I'm at a loss to understand you, Donald. Yes, Donald Grant, I remember you very well, and from the trouble I used to take with you to make you distinguish between the work of the poet and that of the rhymester. I should have thought by this time you would have known a little more about the nature of poetry. All right, so here, we'll get the context by his answer. Personification is a figure of speech in constant use by all poets. This was Fergus's reply to Donald, right? Oh, wait, but there's true and there's false personifications. And it's not like a poet. There's a poet knows the difference. Oh, I know, you'll be down upon me with your Byron. Fergus shook his head as at a false impeachment, but Donald went on, but even a poet cannot make lies in poetry. You're not supposed to lie in poetry, you're not meant to. And man, in his own grandest verses, could have you about the birth of a young earthquake. Losh, to think about it growing old. Earthquack, that's how it looks like. But hath to me, it's not up till the duck quack. Such a poet might well, I grant you, but he ever such a good poet when he took heed to what he said. He might well, I say, blather nonsense about the sea warring against the rocks and such stuff. All right, so he's saying this isn't true, his poetry about like the personification that he's making. But don't you see them, said Fergus, pointing to a great billow, a big wave that fell back at the moment and lay churning in the gulf beneath them. Are they not, in fact, wasting the rocks away by slow degrees? What comes of your simile, then, of the vanity of their endeavor? But that's not what I'm caring about. What I maintain is, so Donald's still speaking, as though, the rocks were trying to do this. That's how you're bringing it up. That's not their design, nor the design of Yuki O's to Kill, the tree, when he rubs his skin off there. What are they, like a horse? A yucky horse? OWSE is what he has here. But even if you think of a porcupine or a bear or whatever, when they're not trying to diminish the tree when they're doing that. They're just getting the stuff off their back or whatever they're doing. It's down here. It's down the lower bottom paragraphs on this side. If you want to write it in the comments for us, if you understand. If someone wants to, otherwise we'll just keep carrying on with the story. But anyway, tut. Nobody ever means what he personifies the powers of nature that they know what they are about. The more necessary to attribute to them nothing but their real design. That's how Donald replies to him. He's like, well, then don't say that that's what they're trying to do, because then you're acting like they are trying to do that, and then you're saying it's vanity, but they are actually doing that, but they're not trying to do that. That's not their goal. If they don't know what they are about, how can you be so foolish as to talk of their design? A thing has a design, and again, it doesn't know it. If it doesn't know itself, that's just what your true and lawful personification comes in. There's no reason as a poet shouldn't attribute to a thing a conscious design, that which lies at the very heart of its being, the design for which it is there. That you can't do that if that's not its design. That isn't isn't neither such determine the personification you give a thing, for that's the truth of the thing. And then Fergus, the jaws is fetching within the rocks. They're part of a grand cleansing harmony, right? They're just doing like what waves do for whatever God's purposes are. But anyway, they're at their housemaid's work day and night to have the world clean and grand and bonny, and they sing at it. Given if I was you, I wouldn't tell folks such nonsense as yours. I would tell them as look at how they do their work in the world and do the right gait. You like walk in the right way. And nothing's worth a minimum to say for a while, for you have these wee creatures doing the will of him, that it's like it's the best to do the will of the one who created us, right? And anyway, instead of feigning on with the jabble of the jaws against the rocks, for it's such a thing as to haud the muckle sea clean. And see, when I lie in my bed, at once there comes a wee saw of wind in my face, and I look and see it was nothing but the wings of a flitting flea. I think with myself, oh, the curses are but blessings, and you don't know of such intelligence. something like this midge fly, right? As flea, but muckle drowning in things. Anyway, I'll just say some of the words. Singing bass, not to mention, and the martins and the crows and the kites and the owlets and the muckle eagles, and the butterflies is just holding their own ground. Something, anyway, that's the best I got of my chemistry last session. And fain would I have ever watered in the motion about me, served by wagging with my wings or whisking with my tail, as just a wonderful. It's a grain consorted confusion of harmony and order. What makes the confusion is only just a thing working, and nothing sits idle. But away with the nonsense of the thing worrying and fetching one another, not till you come to beasts and folks, so do you have such enough of it. Okay, so he's talking about, you can't say that the rocks are worrying, the waves are worrying about whether they're wearing down the rocks and stuff. You can't say that unless you're talking about some kind of animal doing something intentionally, or even humans, which do something even more consciously, They do it instinctually. All the time, Fergus had been poking the point of his stick into the ground, a smile of superiority curling his lip. I hope, ladies, your wits are not swept away in this flood of Doric, he said. You have a poor opinion of the stability of our brains, Mr. Duff, said Mrs. Sclater. She's going to correct him, right, in her own way. I was only judging by myself, he replied, a little put out. I can't say I understood our friend here, did you? Perfectly, answered Mrs. Sclater. She understands Donald now, right? Because she's from Scotland herself, even though, they look at it as lower class to speak as such, but it's not. Anyway, at that moment came a thunderous wave with a great boof into the hollow at the end of the gully on whose edge they stood. There's your housemaid's broom, Donald, said Ginevra. They all laughed, right? It's cleaning. Everything depends on how you look at a thing, said Fergus, and said no more, inwardly resolving, however, to omit from his sermon a certain sentence about the idle waves dashing themselves to ruin on the rocks they would destroy, and to work in something instead about the winds of the winter tossing the snow. A pause followed. Well, this is Saturday, and tomorrow is my work day, ladies, he said. If you would oblige me with your address, Miss Galbraith, I should do myself the honor of calling on Mr. Galbraith. Wow. Ginevra told him where they lived, but added she was afraid he must not expect to see her father, for he had been out of health lately and would see nobody. At all events, I shall give myself the chance, he rejoined, and bidding the ladies goodbye and nodding to the youths, turned and walked away. Oh my gosh. Ugh. Anyway, for some time there was silence. At length Donald spoke. Poor Fergus, he said with a little sigh. He's a good-natured creature and was a great help to me, but when I think of him a preacher, I seem to see an Egyptian priest standing on the threshold of the great door of Istanbul, blowing with all his might to keep out the Libyan desert, and the 4 great stone gods sitting behind the altar, far back in the gloom, laughing at him. Wow. Then Ginevra asked him something which led to a good deal of talk about the true and false in poetry, and made Mrs. Sclater feel it was not for nothing she had befriended the lad from the hills in the strange garments. And she began to think whether her husband might not be brought to take a higher view of his calling, right? To be a minister. Her husband is a pastor, and he's learning how to be actually a good person from Gibbie mostly, but anyway. On Monday, Fergus went to pay his visit to Mr. Galbraith. As Ginevra had said, her father did not appear, but Fergus was far from disappointed. He had taken it into his head that Miss Galbraith sided with him when that ill-bred fellow made his rude, not to say ungrateful, attack upon him, and was much pleased to have a talk with her, right? He sees himself as, superior still. Ginevra thought it would not be right to cherish against him the memory of the one sin of his youth in her eyes, but she would not like him. She did not know why, but the truth was, she felt, without being able to identify, his unreality, like he's not being real, he's just being a seeming person. She thought it was because, both in manners and in dress, so far as the custom of his calling would permit, he was that unpleasant phenomenon, a fine gentleman. She had never heard him preach, or she would have liked him still less, for he was an orator, right? Just speaking. Orations. I think that's in the Confessions of St. Augustine, that they would pay him at first, before he converted, to do orations, and he would learn how to speak them in this manner. But anyway, for he was an orator, willful and prepense, choice of long words, fond of climaxes, and always aware of the points at which he must wave his arm, right? Throw forward his hands, wipe his eyes with the finest of large cambric handkerchiefs, for effect, right? As it was, she was heartily tired of him before he went, and when he was gone, found, as she sat with her father, that she could not recall a word he had said. Wow, right? As to what had made the fellow stay so long, she was therefore positively unable to give her father an answer, in the consequence of which was, that the next time he called, Mr. Galbraith, much to her relief, stood the brunt of his approach and received him. What is it, Leia? What do you see? A bunny rabbit? We'll walk after this. I'm going to walk with her. The ice just broken, his ingratiating manners, and the full-blown respect he showed Mr. Galbraith, enabling the weak man to feel himself, as of old, every inch a laird, even though he lost all of his property. He wasn't a lord anymore. But since Fergus had known him as such, he kept treating him as such, anyway, it's just feeding each other's egos. He showed Mr. Galbraith, enabling the weak man to feel himself, as of old, every inch a laird, as was upon him that, when he took his leave, he gave him a cordial invitation to repeat his visit. He did so in the evening this time, and remembered a predilection of the laird's, begged for a game of backgammon, because he knew he used to play it. The result of his policy was that, of many weeks that followed, every Monday evening, at least, he spent with the laird. Ginevra was so grateful to him for his attention to her father, and his efforts to draw him out of his gloom, that she came gradually to let a little light of favor shine upon him. And if the heart of Fergus Duff was drawn to her, that is not to be counted to him a fault. Neither that, his heart thus drawn, should he wish to marry her. Had she been still heiress of Glashruach, he dared not have dreamed such a thing. But noting the humble condition in which they were reduced, the growing familiarity of the father, and the friendliness of the daughter, he grew very hopeful, and more anxious than ever to secure the presentation to the North Church, which was in the gift of the city, right? Then he could brag about that and his position and, marry her, whatever. He could easily have got a rich wife, but he was more greedy of distinction than of money, and to marry the daughter of the man to whom he had been accustomed in childhood to look up as the greatest in the known world was in his eyes like a patent of nobility, would be a ratification of his fitness to mingle with the choice of the land, right? Anyway. Chapter LL. What is that? Anyway, the North Church. It was a cold night in March, cloudy and blowing. Every human body was turned into a fortress for bare defense of life. There was no snow on the ground, but it seemed as if there must be snow everywhere. There was snow in the clouds overhead, and there was snow in the mind of man beneath. The very air felt like the quarry out of which the snow had been dug, which was being ground above. The wind felt black, the sky was black, the lamps were blowing about as if they wanted to escape, for the darkness was after them. It was the Sunday following the induction of Fergus, and this was the meteoric condition through which Donald and Gibbie passed on their way to the North Church to hear him preach in the pulpit that was now his own. Oh my gosh. Don't worry, George MacDonald will speak on this in this book, right? The people had been gathering since long before the hour, and the youths could find only standing room near the door. Cold as was the weather, and keen as blew the wind into the church, every time a door was opened, the instant it was shut again, it was warm, for the place was crowded from the very height of the great steep-sloping galleries, at the back of which the people were standing on the window-sills, down to the double swing doors, which were constantly cracking open, as if the house was literally too full to hold the congregation. The aisles also were crowded with people standing, all eager yet solemn, with granite faces and live eyes. One who did not know better might well have imagined them gathered in hunger after good tidings from the kingdom of truth and hope, if you didn't know better, right? Whereby they might hasten the coming of that kingdom in their souls and the souls that they loved, right? Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. If you're aligned to that, you welcome that, you bring it more here on earth, right? That's what they would have mistaken them. But it was hardly that. It was indeed a long way from it. And no such thing, the eagerness was, in the mass, doubtless with exceptions, to hear the new preacher, the pyrotechnist of human logic, right? Throwing flashes of light, like a pyrotechnic, and eloquence, who was about to burn his halfpenny blue lights over the abyss of truth and throw his yelping crackers into it. Wow. Wow. The eyes of the young men went wandering over the crowd, looking for any of their few acquaintances, but below they mostly fell, of course, on the backs of heads. There was, however, no mistaking either Ginevra's bonnet or the occupant perched like a capital on the long neck of her father. They sat a good way in front, about the middle of the great church. At the sight of them, Gibbie's face brightened. Donald's turned pale as death. For only the last week but one, he had heard of the frequent visits of the young preacher to the cottage. He did not like that Fergus is going to visit with him. And of the favor in which he was held by both father and daughter. That's just what he heard, right? And his state of mind since had not, with all his philosophy, to rectify and support it, being an enviable one. That he could not for a moment regard himself as a fit husband for the lady lass, so he didn't regard himself as that, or dream of exposing himself or her to the insult which the offer of himself as a son-in-law would bring on them both from the laird. It was not a reflection to render the thought of such a bag of wind as Fergus Duff marrying her. So he's a bag of, like, he's thinking, but not Fergus Duff, right? One whit the less horribly unendurable. Had the laird been in the same social position as before, Donald would have no fear of his accepting Fergus, but misfortune alters many relations. Fergus's father was a man of considerable property, Fergus himself almost a man of influence and already in possession of a comfortable income now that he's at this church, right? It was possible to imagine that the impoverished Thomas Galbraith, late of Glashruach Esquire, might contrive to swallow what annoyance there could not but in any case be in wedding his daughter to the son of John Duff, late his own tenant of the Mains. So now you know all the stuff that I was saying, that was his tenant's son, right? Before, he'd never think of such a thing. Anyway, altogether Donald's thoughts were not of the kind to put himself in fit mood. I do not say together benefit from the prophesying of Fergus. Ain't no prophesying. Oh, I kept wondering what that lyric could mean. And here we have an answer. Wow. Because I don't want a song to... there's a song called I Could Hold You in My Arms. I could hold you forever. But if you're prophesying falsely, then, I wouldn't want to sing about a song that says not to prophesy, because some of us, we're called to. The Holy Spirit's in us. John 16:13 says the Spirit will lead, guide, and direct us and show us things to come. So that's prophecy. That's for all Christians in a way. But anyway, that's a long study. Anyway, so he was not in the mood to gather benefit, right? A fit mood, I do not say to gather benefit from the prophesying of Fergus, but to give fair play to the peddler who now rose to display his loaded calico and beggarly shoddy over the bookboard of the pulpit. And so you know how back in the old days, like if you think of Little House on the Prairie time, this is when this was written, how people would come by and say, hey, here are these potions and these are going to work, and Anyway, I won't comment. But the congregation listened rapt. I dare not say there was no divine reality concerned in his utterance, for Gibbie saw many a glimmer through the rents in his logic and thin-worn patches of his philosophy. So Gibbie could see some truth. Leia, it's okay. He sees a bunny or something over there. She does. She's a she. I'm thinking of Gibbie, though. Gibbie saw many a glimmer through the rents in his logic and the thin-worn patches of his philosophy. But it was not such glimmers that fettered the regards of the audience, but the noisy flow and false eloquence of the preacher. In proportion to the falsehood in us, are we exposed to the falsehood in others? Someone said ego. I think Eckhart Tolle said that. Egos are attracted to even bigger egos. They don't recognize egoless people. They see them as dull or something, They don't recognize them. I love it when, for me, this guy named John Butler starts showing up in my YouTube algorithm, and that's showing me oftentimes that I got more to a quiet place in my heart and my soul, and I'm back to this centered place. But when he's not showing up, he's showing up right now, so that's good. Then it's like I've been off in some other false identity again. God pull us back to true essence. Anyway, I hate it, but anyway, God, do whatever you wish to pull us back, Lord. Pull us back to your real essence. Anyway, so he says, in proportion to the falsehood in us, are we exposed to the falsehood in others? The false plays upon the false without discord. So there's no, St. Ignatius of Loyola talks about this. The enemy comes in, and if you're yielded to God, then it will be like a clashing sound. If you're yielded to the enemy, then he just sneaks right in because that door's open. And so it's like water on a sponge instead of water on a rock. There's a whole contemplation about that. The false plays upon the false without discord, comes to the false and is welcomed as the true. There is no jar, for the false to the false look the true. Darkness takes darkness for light, and great is the darkness. I will not attempt an account of the sermon. Even admirably rendered, it would be worthless as the best copies of a bad wallpaper. Wow. There was in it, to be sure, such a glowing description of the city of God as might have served to attract thither all the diamond merchants of Amsterdam. Wow. But why a Christian should care to go to such a place, let him tell who knows, while on the other hand, the audience appeared equally interested in his equiponderation description of the place of misery, right? Well, of hell, basically, he's describing that as well. Not once did he give, or attempt to give, or indeed could have given, the feeblest idea to a single soul present of the one terror of the universe, of the peril of being cast from the arms of essential love and life. That's capital L and L, love and life, into the bosom of living death. For this teacher of men knew nothing whatever but by hearsay, and had not in himself experienced one of the joys or one of the horrors he endeavored to embody. So he didn't know how to bring people into heaven or to keep them from hell. He didn't know that. Hi. Leia, shh, 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 shh. Leia, shh, 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 shh. Leia, was just another dog. I'll be leaving in a couple of minutes if you want to hear. Okay. I didn't know if you wanted to sit in the other bench. Anyway, Gibbie was not at home listening to such a sermon. He was distressed and said afterwards to Donald he would far rather be subjected to Mr. Sclater's isms than Fergus's Asians, gyrations and all this stuff, right? And it caused him pain to see Donald look so scornful, so contemptuous even, while it added to Donald's unrest and swelled his evil mood to see Mr. Galbraith absorbed. For Ginevra's bonnet, it did not once move, but then it was not set at an angle to indicate either eyes upturned and listening or cast down in emotion. Donald would have sacrificed not a few songs, the only wealth he had, right, his poetry, he possessed, for one peep round the corner of that bonnet. He had become painfully aware that much he had seen of Ginevra. He knew scarcely anything of her thoughts. He had always talked so much more to her than she to him that now, when he longed to know, he could not even guess what she might be thinking, or what effect such an arrangement of red and yellow would have upon her imagination and judgment. I think red and yellow is what they would call propaganda back then. My hand's falling asleep. Okay, we're almost done. I was using this hand to block the wind, but red and yellow just means lies, right? She could not think or receive what was not true. He felt sure, but she might easily enough attribute truth where it did not exist. At length, the rockets, Roman candles, and squibs were all burnt out. The would-be eternal blazon was over, and the preacher sunk back, exhausted in his seat. My friend Elliot has a song called Roman Candle. Anyway, the people sang a prayer, fit pendant to such a sermon followed. The people sang a prayer fit pendant to such a sermon followed, and the congregation was dismissed. It could not be with much additional strength to meet the sorrows, temptations, sophisms, commonplaces, disappointments, dullness, stupidities, and general devilries of the week. Although not a few paid the preacher welcome compliments on his grand discourse, right? The young men were out among the first, and going round to the other door in the churchyard by which they judged Ginevra and her father must issue, there stood waiting. The night was utterly changed. The wind had gone about, and the vapors were high in heaven, broken all into cloud masses of sombre grandeur. Now from behind, now upon their sides, they were made glorious by the full moon, while through their rents appeared the sky and ever marvelous stars. Gibbie's eyes went climbing up the spire that shot skyward over their heads. Around its point the clouds and the moon seemed together, grouping themselves in grand carelessness, and he thought of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. This is almost the end of the chapter. To us, mere heaps of watery vapor, ever ready to fall, drowning the earth in rain or burying it in snow, and to angel feet they might be solid masses whereon to tread attendant upon him, who, although with his word he ruled winds and seas, loved to be waited on by the multitude of his own. He was yet gazing, forgetful of the human tide about him, watching the glory dominant over storm, right? The storm of what just happened. He was keep looking up. I have this British friend that's he doesn't call himself a Christian. Maybe he calls himself an atheist, and he always says, "Chin up, keep looking up." He's one of my best encouragers in my life. Anyway, there he looked above, forgetful of the human tide about him, watching the glory dominant over storm. When his companion pinched his arm, he looked, and he was aware that Fergus, muffled to the eyes, was standing beside them. He seemed not to see them, and they were nowise inclined to attract his attention, but gazed motionless on the church door, an unsealed fountain of souls. What an envious thing it is to watch an issuing crowd of faces for one for one loved one, all so unattractive, provoking, blamable, as they come rolling round corners, dividing and flowing away, not one of them the right one. But at last out she did come, Ginevra, like a daisy among mown grass. It was really she, but with her father. She saw Donald glance from him to Gibbie, cast down her sweet eyes and made no sign. Fergus had already advanced and addressed the laird. "Ah, Mr. Duff," said Mr. Galbraith, "excuse me, but would you oblige me by giving your arm to my daughter? I see a friend waiting to speak to me. I shall overtake you in a moment." Fergus murmured his pleasure, and Ginevra and he moved away together. The youths for a moment watched the father. He dawdled, evidently wanted to speak to no one. Then they followed the two, walking some yards behind them. Every other moment Fergus would bend his head towards Ginevra. Once or twice they saw the little bonnet turn upwards in response or question. Why should the minister... Poor Donald was burning with lawless and foolish indignation. Why should the minister muffle himself up like an old woman in the crowd and take off the great handkerchief when talking to the lady? When the youths reached the street where the cottage stood, they turned the corner after them and walked quickly up to them where they stood at the gate, waiting for it to be opened. "Such a grand night." Hold on, there's another person nearby. Said Donald after the usual greetings. "Sir Gibbie and me having a dinner with the moon. You would think she had light enough to hold the clouds off of her, don't you, ma'am? But now they'll be upon her, and I'm for there to think something." He's saying something. "But dinna you see," he went on, pointing to the clouds about the moon. "Then over there, I'm doubting. Long talk. Anyway, good night, ma'am. Good night. Leah. Hi there. Fergus. One second. Oh, yeah. She's so fierce, right? Okay, he's on the phone. So, you should make yourself, like the clouds, you could be... Anyway, he's saying something here. Here and here. I'll just finish it up. Something about New Jerusalem. Therewith Donald walked on, doubtless for a moment a little relieved. But before they had walked far, he broke down altogether. "Gibbie," he said, "yon rascal's going to marry the lady lass, and it drives me mad to think of it. Given I could but once speak to her and tell her, just once, Lord, what will come of the grown-ups, of the Mains, and the heather upon Glashgar?" He burst out crying, but instantly dashed away his tears with indignation at his weakness. "I must dread my word, undergo my doom," that's what it said. He said, and said no more. Gibbie's face had grown white in the moon gleams, and his lips trembled. He put his arm through Donald's and clung to him, and in silence they went home, because they had 2 rooms they were renting in the same place. When they reached Donald's room, Donald entered, shut the door behind him, and shut out Gibbie. He stood for a moment like one dazed, then suddenly, coming to himself, turned away, left the house, and ran straight to Dower Street. When the minister's door was opened to him, he went to that of the dining room, knowing Mr. and Mrs. Sclater would then be at supper. Happily for his intent, the minister was at that moment having his tumbler of toddy after the labours of the day, an indulgence which, so long as Gibbie was in the house, he had never since first the dinner party taken in private. He took it in private. He didn't do it in public, as he pretended to himself for the boy's painful associations with it. But in reality, to his credit, be it told, if it may, from a little shame of the thing itself, and his wife, therefore, when she saw Gibbie, rose, and meeting him, took him with her to her own little sitting room, where they had a long talk, of which the result appeared the next night in a note from Mrs. Sclater to Gibbie, asking him and Donald to spend the evening of Tuesday with her. So she has a plan, to help the girl, obviously. So the next chapter is called The Quarry. It's a really good chapter. I wish you so much love. Sorry we went 9 minutes over, probably from the break. Or anyway, I just sometimes want to come to the end of a chapter. Make sure to like and comment and all those things. This pushes the video out to other people. That's how the algorithm works. But I trust God to be above the algorithms. Much love.